Welcome back to Beekeeping 101. I'm Kamon Reynolds, and we have a lot to show you right now. There's just so much going on with the changes in brood. We might even see some emerging bees today. I want to talk to you about what we should be seeing at this stage, when we need to add more space, should we feed more, how to read the combs, and so much more. How often should we inspect our bees? So now that our queens are laying in both of these hives, I've checked these a little bit more than you have. How often should we inspect them? And it really depends on what's going on, time of the year, all that kind of stuff. And so when there's something like an early package, I might check it 7 days apart. But if I know that there's really nothing coming up, then I'll do it every other week. I like every other week as general checking and maintenance. Even after my honey flow is done and I'm in what's called the dearth period, which is a period of a lack of pollen and nectar, and that's when robbing season kicks in. That's a whole nother topic. But even during that period when things slow down and it's hotter, I want to check every other week. And this is because bees are short-lived creatures. The bees themselves, the foragers, the non-queens, they are going to only last about 5 weeks. Give or take. And so that is important to know as a new beekeeper, because if you don't check them for a month and you had some type of issue, queenlessness or something like that, and that doesn't happen super often, but it does happen, and it's easy to fix early on. And if we wait a month or so, that can be a problem. So every other week is good to know what's going on, and we don't need to dive in too much. Once we get to 2 brood chambers, and that's what I'm looking for. So if you're doing mediums, I recommend 3 mediums, 2 10-frame deep boxes. If you're doing 8-frame boxes or something similar, I recommend 2 of those as well. That's a good brood area. It's not only good for the queen to lay in, but there has to be a lot of frames of pollen and frames of honey as well. So there needs to be plenty of space. That's the goal, is to get both of these to 2 10-frame deep boxes, and then we're going to try to start adding medium supers for next year's honey crop. We won't make any honey this year, and I've barely got my smoker going. All right, got the smoker going, and we have fed each one of these in the last 3 weeks 5 quarts of 1-to-1 ratio sugar syrup apiece. And they say smoke follows beauty, so notice how it's going far away from Daniel and me. All right, let's get into the colony right here. Whoa, and pull the jar off first next time, Kamon. So we can look down right into here, and what I'm seeing is good. I'm seeing they're on about 5 frames right now, 4.5 or so, and we have some fat combs. We always want to work from the edge over here, and we're at 3 weeks. So what does this mean for our package? What this means is this is about as low of a population as we're going to see it, because some of the bees have expired from the package. Several of them are still alive. However, they're going to get older, but we're going to start seeing a growth, hopefully a booming growth in population, because the new bees that this queen is producing are going to start emerging from these combs. So this is very typical. Bees will put the honey or the sugar syrup and the bee bread, if they are able to, away from the brood. There will be a rim around it, but the majority of it, that's going to be on the edge over in here. They've drawn this one out really good. This is where they've capped the honey. Once it's ripened all the way, they cap that. And we have our bee bread down into here. So this is a good edge frame right here. And now we'll probably see brood on this one. So right here we have capped honey or capped sugar syrup, and when the bees feel like it's dehydrated down enough, they will cap it, but sometimes they won't. They will only cap it when they feel like there's excess. They're not going to generate wax when there's a shutdown of either you feeding them or natural nectar coming into the hive. One thing to note is that there's different types of cappings. You can see how there's really white looking ones. This means there's a little bit of an air gap between the honey or the sugar syrup and the cappings, and it's a little bit different. And then you can see how some of them are a little bit more liquid colored, I suppose, or more of a honey. You can kind of see it behind it. It's because they've just capped it differently. So those are called wet capped, and these whiter ones are dry capped. It does not make a difference, but some people have in the past bred for that. They don't really do it anymore, but they did that for comb honey. So that's going to be your honey and your syrup stores right there. And a colony that's about this size or bigger needs to have at least 3 frames of this at some point. Now, we're constantly feeding, so it's okay. But at some point, we're going to want to have 3 frames equivalent minimum of this honey. Now, look at all of this bee bread right here. What is bee bread? This is so important. This is what actually makes the bees. You have to have some of this stuff too. This is an energy and a fuel source. This is the building blocks of bees and queens, everything. So this is pollen, and you can see multiple different floral sources of pollens that they've packed into here. And if you scrape that out, a lot of times you'll see different layers and different colors of pollens. And the bees ferment this. They take a little bit of nectar and a little bit of their saliva, and they pack it in there with their heads and mix all that together and create a lactobacillus, I think I'm saying that correctly, effect, kind of like yogurt. And that preserves the pollen. Pollen and nectar both ferment and go bad very quickly. And so the bees, knowing this, they're mixing this up so it's a long-term protein, fat, and mineral source so they can build bees off of that in the future. And also for the nectar or the sugar syrup, they're ripening that up. Here in the center, this may look kind of like capped honey, but it's different. This is capped brood. This is very important. This is going to be emerging soon, and they cap this on day 9. And so it won't be very long, and this will be emerging out as fresh young bees, and that will be exciting. Let's see if we can find some more things to look at in this colony. Now let's talk a little bit about how fat this is. Look at how far this honey is sticking out. This is a unique thing for the colony. They won't do this with pollen, and they won't do this with brood. They won't draw combs out really fat. And this can be kind of a problem because sometimes they'll just draw this side quicker and it'll stick out quite far. And that, of course, means they won't draw this side out all the way. And if it's deep enough at all, this can be a frustrating problem. So what I would like to do is trim this off with a hive tool and just go right down in there. We want to smoke the bees out of the way, and we can flatten that, trim that. We can leave the honey up on top of the frames or whatever, and that's going to help them finish drawing out this other side. So let's go ahead and pull this out. And you can see where they weren't drawing that out very good. Now, let me flip this frame around for you. And let me move the bees out of the way a little bit. So down in here, we have young larvae, and it's very difficult to see, but we have eggs and we have young larvae in this frame. They'll draw that honey out really deep sometimes, but they'll never do that with pollen, and they'll never do that with brood. You'll see some eggs up in this top corner up here, and one thing you'll notice, look at that. In this corner, there's multiple eggs in some of those cells. A lot of beekeepers will tell you if you see multiple eggs, this is a sign of laying workers, and that's when they've been queenless for a long period of time, and they also have no young brood. The pheromones of young, healthy brood from a queen will prevent your colony from going laying workers, but when they have neither queen and no brood, the workers themselves, start laying. It'll never work out because they're not fully fertile females, but that is a really big problem. However, when you have a new queen or a colony that has limited space, the queen sometimes will accidentally drop multiple eggs. And sometimes when there's limited space, she just needs to lay. She's so young, she just really needs to lay. And so sometimes she'll lay 2 or 3 eggs in there. So just because you see that once or twice, or even 20 or 30 times, that doesn't always mean it's cause for panic. So don't worry about that. One thing you may have noticed when it came to the larvae down into here is they're floating in a pool of jelly. When we raise queens ourselves, we actually graft from young larvae. And grafting actually means we just pick them up out of there and put them in another cup in a hive that's completely queenless and massively powerful. And that is because for the first about 2 days after the egg hatches, they're just getting fed nothing but royal jelly. After that initial period, they will start getting fed worker jelly, and at this point, they're going to start developing into an infertile female. Every single one of these eggs had the potential to be a queen, except if they're laid in a drone cell. And what's the difference between a drone cell? I don't see any yet. Let's see if we can find some drone cells. At this early stage, you don't see a lot of the development of drone combs or drone cells, and that's because that's an extra expense for the bees. The bees, when they're smaller, are less likely to invest into that because drones are a big expense and they're not out working, bringing in pollen or nectar or water or anything else. Wow, what a beautiful frame. Holy smokes, this is what you love to see. This is telling you so much. This is prime health. There's multiple things going on here that are great. One, this is packed full of brood. One deep frame like this on both sides with this high of a percentage of brood, when this emerges, is going to cover about 3 frames in here. So this colony is going to explode. They cap on day 9. So within, let's say that was capped today, within 12-ish, 13 days, this is all going to be emerged out and this hive is going to grow exponentially. And this is just one frame. So this is great. But look, this is the other thing I wanted to show you. See how uniform that is? It's very uniform in coloration. It's not got divots in it. It doesn't look off-colored. It's pretty even and nice. This is going to vary slightly. If this was an older comb, it's still going to be uniform in color and shape and everything. It's just going to be darker looking because the combs are darker. But this, you should see that uniformity. This is a sign of a healthy colony, is that uniform capping. They're healthy and that brood is healthy. What a beautiful brood pattern from this Golden West Queen. All right, so now we're looking at this side and going, why does this one not look quite as uniform? Well, look at this. They have not quite capped all of this side yet. And if you get in a period of time where you're having just a massive flow, sometimes they're just bringing in so much nectar and so much pollen, they can't draw comb fast enough to get it out of the queen's way. We're really in a good position right now where we have a light flow going on, but it's not heavy. A strong flow is great for honey production colonies. A massively strong flow can be really rough on little colonies as they're trying to keep up with it. These bees are drawing this comb really nice right now. I haven't seen any drone brood. I'm sure we've got to have some somewhere. Oh, there's the queen. Of course, she's hiding. Most queens are like Laurel. That's why I name a lot of them Laurel. They just don't like the camera. That's my wife, by the way. There she is. And you can see this is a very productive queen. As the bees are drawing this out, she's filling it up. And notice how wax is white. When the bees gorge on sugar syrup or nectar, they secrete out of 6 glands underneath their abdomen, and it comes out just about as white as white could be. And then very quickly it starts turning yellow. And this is for multiple reasons. The bees stepping on it, putting honey, pollen, and then eventually it'll become brown, and eventually over a long period of times black from all of the pupal casings of the bees going through metamorphosis and all of that kind of stuff. I usually keep my combs at least 5 years. I've kept them up to 10 plus years, and I never really had a problem with it. I know many people will say otherwise, but I use organic things in my hives to control mites and problems, and I've just not had an issue. As a new beekeeper, I think you shouldn't get rid of your combs too early. No quicker than 3 years, unless you have a very weird situation. What a beautiful queen, and what a beautiful colony this is. So I'm still not seeing any drone brood. Maybe the other colony will have that. But what dictates when you get drones is just the cell size. Once the bees feel like they can invest into that, they're going to start building that. And when this colony has 2 deep boxes here in about a few weeks or so, you're going to be able to see a lot of drone comb. And the queen measures each cell and goes, okay, this one is too big for a worker. We're going to put a drone in here. And she just doesn't fertilize the egg. So drone eggs are not fertilized and worker bees are. This is probably a frame of food. And it is. All right. Not much there. This looks perfect. This colony is fixing to explode. It hasn't grown at all in population of bees since we installed it, but they're going to be emerging any day now. And I may have missed a couple that were emerging, but they're going to be growing soon. And this is where you have to be careful as a new beekeeper. We need to give them more space. This time of the year with all the resources coming in naturally, and of course we're feeding them too, and I'm going to continue to feed them because there's a lot of needs to draw this out. I'm going to feed 2 quarts this week again, spread out by a few days. And once this colony gets to where it's covering 7 to 8 frames, 8 frames is pushing it, nothing beyond that. Once they're really working good on that 8th frame, you've got to get a second box on these. And so if you're ahead of me in your schedule, be doing that, because if the bees hit the wall and they start running out of room, they're going to backfill the area and then they're going to want to swarm. But if we can give them more space and get them drawing foundations and of course making new comb in the second box, we'll be just fine. You may be asking, Kamon, how do you have such gentle bees? Well, first of all, it's part of the zen and the mastery that I've acquired over the years of dedicating everything I have to this. Absolutely not. That is bull crap. That has nothing to do with that. This is a small colony. It does have a good disposition, but you never can gauge a colony's disposition at this stage. The weather's great. There's pollen to be gotten. There's nectar to be gotten. It's a small colony, and there's plenty of work for everybody to do. That's the best recipe for the best characteristics of any hive to show themselves, is plenty of work for everybody to do. And so this is a good stage. I do think these bees are fairly gentle, no doubt, but we won't really know what they're going to be like until we start getting about 2 deep boxes, 15 to 20 frames of bees, and we get in a period where there's no pollen and nectar. Then we get to see their true colors at the worst of times. And just keep in mind, even the best of bees that can change overnight, because I've had colonies that were like kittens and then they are naturally requeening themselves. These are usually colonies that are at least a year old or more, and the queens are 2 years old, and they'll supersede the queen. And during that period of supersedure, they are vicious. You'll have opened it up, it'll be like this. Man, this is one of my favorite colonies to do. Next time you open it up, and it's like squadron formation. They've been planning this since before you got there, and they'll staple your socks to your ankles. So this is a good disposition, but don't be fooled. This is not always the case. All right, let's smoke these bees down. And it's good to do that to make sure that we crush as few bees as possible and that we get the queen out of the way. And I guess why I mentioned that, let's talk about that, because you are going to crush some bees, and that is unfortunate. We try to do our best to not crush any. However, honeybees are really more like cells than they are as individuals. This is one super organism. The queen cannot function by herself. The bees can't function by themselves. They have to work together, and they die all the time. So I think it's important for us to do the best we can to not hurt a bee when we can avoid it. But at the same time, it's going to happen, and a good beekeeper is going to do a much better job of raising bees than losing bees. All right, so we are going to fill this up here in a little bit, so I'm just going to set it like that. And let's go over to this one. All right, now we've popped into the Saskatraz hive over here, and I've been in it before, so I could kind of prep some of the material. And I know that there's a comb in here that's funky, and you're going to see this and go, oh, I've had that before. The other colony has done a really good job of drawing some good clean combs, but this one right here has 1 or 2 that just isn't what I was hoping to get. So let's stick this over here. We've got some bees clustering right there, just foundations. And okay, so we have larvae, but it's like this over in here. Ah, here it is. Look at this. Let me shake this off really quick. So check this out. Look how they've not drawn this properly on the foundation. And I don't know why this is. Bees just do this sometimes. And here we actually have some drone brood right here. There's one cell, And there's one right there. And it's just crazy how much they've messed this up over here. It's manageable, but this is going to be a pain in the rear end. And I'm here to tell you right now, we're not fixing this anytime soon, because I don't want to lose this larvae right here. There's a lot of brood. There's also resources, but I don't want to fool with this long term, because straight combs help us to not accidentally damage bees, roll the queen. It also just makes it easier on us, because whenever you do that with bees, they're going to release alarm pheromone, and I don't want to do that. I do have a couple of bad habits, like leaving that lid in front of the entrance. You know, it's best not to obstruct that. But sometimes I just do bad things because I guess I'm used to it. I don't know why. I get lazy, I guess. But I don't want to lose all this brood here. But what needs to happen, I prefer it more like this. But the only way that we're going to be able to fix this is to let them expand, and we're going to eventually move this frame over to the wall, because eventually those wall frames, they're just going to put pollen and honey in them. And after they've let that brood emerge out, once I've got some resources in there, or they've emptied it out of brood, then I can scrape this down, get it flat, and I'm going to have to re-wax this, because whenever bees do this, for whatever reason, they pull that all the way down to the plastic foundation. And if it's not just a plastic foundation problem, if you're using wax foundation, they will do the same thing, except they're going to just, all these gaps right here, they would have just eaten through your wax foundation, and there's no fixing that at all. So we'd have to scrape all of this weird stuff up, get some hot wax in a crock pot with a roller, and just roll on another layer. And then that would work out good. And I'd also put it over here. A little bit of that is okay. But over time, I really like to fix those. But now is not the time for that. This is normal though. And it happens from time to time. Notice how I'm just putting a light bit of smoke over the top. I'm not trying to drive the bees down really hard and fast. We don't want them running all over the place. Okay. So now we've got mixed stages of brood here. You can see that these bees are a little bit darker than the others. And they're a good looking bee. I had scraped some stuff off of here earlier. Whoops. They had just built all kinds of stuff on the bottom. I probably should have saved that for the video. But I don't like buildup down there. I don't like buildup anywhere that's going to be crushing bees. We want to take care of that as soon as possible. All right, this is more like it. So why did they do this one so good and not the others? The answer is nobody knows. I have no clue. I waxed all of these myself. Maybe I missed a spot, but there's many times you don't miss a spot, or you buy from a good manufacturer and they've done a good job coating it, and the bees just get creative. I can't explain all the reasons why. I've drawn tens of thousands of foundations, and I'm here to tell you I'll have 50 colonies in a yard and one of them just goes nuts. And I don't know why. So don't sweat it too much, but you will get more weird stuff if you have poorly coated foundations. And be very careful of the cheap foundations on Amazon. You know, there are these kits, and I'm not trying to pick on anybody, but the Hoover Hives, the Chinese kits like Bee Castle, they're really bad about not being honest. And they don't use beeswax when they say that they do. So you'll see where you have more and more issues with this sometimes with those kits, because they've created a hybrid wax that can work sometimes, but a lot of times the bees don't like it and they'll do weird stuff to it. So you got to really be careful with the Chinese products, because most of the time there's not beeswax on them, or very little. So this is all drone comb right here. This is another funky area. They decided to raise some drones. Nothing necessarily wrong with that other than it's bleeding over. That's why we had that gap in that other side. So it is what it is. And you can see when we pull these things apart, it opens this up. And that's why we like to get nice, flat, and even foundations and combs, is so that when we do our inspections, we're not really doing any damage, or very, very little damage. This is part of it though, and I wouldn't sweat it too much. As you can see, it happened to my packages. It's probably going to happen to yours. Hopefully not a lot, but try not to worry about it too much. I know for new beekeepers especially, you don't want to lose any bees, but at some point, if your queen's making 1,000 bees a day, you're losing 1,000 bees a day. And bees are getting eaten by birds, red tanagers, beautiful birds. They will eat bees like crazy. We also have robber flies, yellow jackets. Bees are super nutritious. They got a honey-filled center and a nice crispy exterior. Who wouldn't want to eat that? Definitely not me. But a lot of creatures love bees for their nutrition and the value that they provide in mass. And so other things are killing your bees. We're not actively trying to, but we need to be honest and realistic about it. And it is part of beekeeping. But once you get the hang of it, you're going to be making some of your own splits, catching some of your own swarms. And if you decide to dedicate yourself to it, you can be super sustainable and raise a lot more bees than what you lose. And I think that's part of the recipe, I think. I really enjoy making splits. And as we go further along with these two, we'll eventually show you how to do that. It's the best way to get to the point where you're not buying bees every year and you're able to really enjoy your hobby because it's a sustainable one. But it's going to take some time. It's going to take some education. Thanks for getting your education here. There's some good bee books out there. I've actually co-written one with one of my buddies who runs 30,000 hives, Blake Shook. It's called The Golden Rules of Beekeeping by Blake and Kamon. And it's really more of a basic ask your questions and here's the answer book. And so you can pick it up and set it down, or even look like this is a question I have and probably find it in the book. That's what it was designed for. Go sit on the chamber pot and read a couple of bits, and then you're good and you're done. And then you can come back later. So hey, that's a book for you right there. That wasn't very good marketing, Daniel. Very few people, especially younger than me, even know what a chamber pot is. All right, I have too much fun. I love beekeeping, and I love that you're doing this with me. Give yourself some time. Be patient with yourself. This is a journey. You're just beginning, and there's a long ways still for you to go with your bees. It's going to be fun, it's going to be rewarding, and there's going to be some disappointing moments. That's always part of becoming good at something, and I know that you can do it. So we'll see you in the next Beekeeping 101.